The demands have been there for several weeks, and I think the peaceful protesters were getting really frustrated that their demands were not being heard by the government. And the Prime Minister's resignation came after violence was unleashed on peaceful protesters. So, this is a very, very dynamic situation in Sri Lanka where, for several weeks things were very, very peaceful. And things changed quite dramatically yesterday when the thugs associated with the government just went out and started destroying and attacking protesters. That is unfortunate because what followed after that was violence across Sri Lanka. And violence that could have been really prevented if this government took action early on.
Yes, that state of emergency really seemed to have provoked this desperation. What is your expectation as to what might happen, as to whether the army will pull back, the armed forces will pull back in terms of the way protesters are being treated?
Well, as we speak, we are in a state of emergency and there's a curfew, island-wide curfew. And this was, the curfew was imposed yesterday because of the violence. Regardless of the curfew, many were on the streets protesting, continuing to call for the resignation of Gotabaya Rajapaksa. But it seems like the violence is somewhat under control in the last few hours, though we are still hearing reports of particular incidents. So it's worrying. It's extremely unstable, and there's worry that there'll be new cycles of violence coming out. Now, emergency is likely to continue till Parliament meets, or if the President decides to revoke it. So it's really something with the President. But I think with the violence, the government will make the case that emergency needs to continue and the military presence is required. So it's very, very alarming developments on the ground in a context, and I want to reiterate this, in a context where peaceful protests happened for several weeks. I mean, nearly 2 months of peaceful protests, and it's unfortunate that it has got to this point.
What do you see happening with the president? I mean, some of the anti-presidential protesters had to be protected by lawyers. They are still wanting the president to resign, of course, the brother of the prime minister. Do you think that is just a matter of time, or does he need to stay there to get the next steps underway?
Well, the demand is clear, Beverly. I mean, the president has to go. I don't think we're going to be able to address all the problems in Sri Lanka if he continues to hold on to office. And this stalemate is likely to continue. So I would urge those around him and the president that to heed the calls of the protesters and resign. I mean, his resignation provides for particular scenarios to take place, which is provided by the Constitution. So, the president resigning can lead to a peaceful transition where there is an election of a president by parliament. The opposition parties and others can come to an arrangement. So these are ongoing discussions, but it needs to start with the president resigning and allowing for a peaceful transition in Sri Lanka.
Is there any sign he will do that?
Well, so far, unfortunately, we don't see him even recognizing that there is the violence that has been erupted. I mean, he did tweet yesterday, but other than tweeting, we have not seen any real action from the president to address the ground realities, the violence that's spreading, but also the cause, the demands of the protesters. So it seems it's a president that's very much tone deaf to what the protesters and the public is calling. And inaction from his side is really detrimental and directly linked to the instability in Sri Lanka.
And therefore, the urgency for a restructure of Sri Lanka's debts so that the IMF will consider some form of relief package must just be suspended at this point.
So the government has commenced discussions with the IMF, and these are just discussions. This has not led to a deal, and so this is to be seen how far this is going to go. And I want to be also very clear: an IMF deal is not going to solve all the problems. There's much more that's required: restructuring the debt and so many other measures. But one needs to have confidence that the government in place in Sri Lanka is able to do it. And at the moment, I don't think the public nor the international community has that confidence, nor does the government has the legitimacy. So there is this massive political crisis in Sri Lanka coupled with the economic crisis. And for that, there are particular steps that can be taken. And the first step is really with the president.
Yes. In terms of an alternative leadership, is that still not 100% clear, given the president needs to be the one to make the first move?
Well, the opposition parties and the different stakeholders are having conversations. This has been there for some time now, and there are different names being thrown. And I think, this is something that will have to be decided. But the first step is for the president to leave, then for parliament to meet and take the next steps. And the constitution, as I mentioned before, does provide for certain things to happen. But the opposition parties also need to come together, recognizing we are in crisis mode. We've been in crisis mode for some time. But there's also, there's some problems in terms of the opposition coming to a common platform. So those are also challenges that need to be addressed quite urgently. Otherwise, this uncertainty is going to continue to the detriment of this country.
Always appreciate your time, Bhavani. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Beverly.